Traders, how are you? With Marcello. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. The food crisis has officially begun, and we even have a news article out of a news company in Australia that's talking about food rationing. I wonder what all those passports for the pandemic were for. Let's get started. So the biggest thing that we have this week is a situation where the commodity prices have absolutely exploded. The major arcing story, obviously, is the war in Ukraine and Russia. The stocks in the United States, mostly negative. The NASDAQ was down almost 3%. Canada was up as well. European markets mostly lower. Europe took a really big beating. Obviously, the war with Russia and Ukraine is in Europe, but most of the situations where the effects, let's say, of the war is being felt in Europe, especially because of the food crisis that's going to begin, in addition to the energy crisis. And I'm going to give you the details of that in just a moment. The biggest loser in Europe was the Italian market, down almost 15%, and most other markets were also down double digits. The Russian market is still closed overall. Latin American markets are mostly higher, which is a surprise. You know, if you guys don't know, a lot of Latin American countries produce a lot of their own food. They're near the equator, outside of, places like Brazil, for example. Brazil's the largest exporter of coffee in the world. So they're not as affected with the situation. And we do have, obviously, Venezuela, even though they're an oil producer, has gone down quite a bit. We have a lot of these countries that are semi-self-sufficient overall in terms of those things, even though they still rely on foreign countries for imports and exports. Africa and the Middle East, mostly mixed. Egypt there was almost 4% positive. And then in the far east, we have the Hang Seng in Hong Kong. Say that 3 times fast. They went down 3.93%. Bitcoin and up there, other news. Bitcoin down just slightly this week, 0.24% at just over 39,000. The major situation this week was that there's actually 2 things. One is Binance, which is the biggest exchange in the world when it comes to crypto, said that they're not going to unilaterally freeze all of Russian users' accounts because we have the situation now where the sanctions are being escalated, where individual people, especially billionaires, are being targeted for their individual property, for example, like yachts and mansions and things like that. And so a lot of governments around the world are saying to a lot of the crypto companies, especially the centralized exchanges like Binance, that they need to just ban everybody from Russia. So they're not going to do that. And they said that they're going to ban or sanction the individual Russians that were sanctioned by the sanctions that were placed by the Western countries. Another thing that was really interesting is the WEF, which is the World Economic Forum, before had a partnership with Binance. They had it on their website, and now it's nowhere to be found. It's a broken page. And so it seems like, in the conspiracy theory for the week, that a lot of the Western countries now, or even countries overall, are going to use that as an excuse to go after the crypto and regulate it, because obviously they don't want Putin to use cryptos to go around the sanctions, even though the United States, for example, is still paying Russia to import oil. So all this hoopla about the sanctions, and we're still giving them money so they can go into Russia and Ukraine and start a war. Just an FYI. A little bit of hypocrisy. Just a little bit of hypocrisy. Just a little bit. In commodities, this is going to be probably a good 2 or 3 or 4 minutes. We talked before, especially if you guys follow me for a while, about the food crisis that's coming, right? This is escalated quite a bit because Russia and Ukraine, even Belarus, account for 25, 30, 40% are not only the grain production and exports, but also the situation with fertilizer. Okay. Now, food prices have reached a record high. There's a UN food index which tracks the price of the increases in food from one month to the next, and that has officially reached a record high. In addition to that, Ukraine and Russia provide 30% of global grains. Now, grains, we're talking about pasta, we're talking about bread, we're talking about even beer that use grain. So keep that in mind. And Europe is the 3rd largest consumer of corn, which supports 70% from Ukraine. Now, I always do these videos that I've been doing for a while so you guys can connect the dots because we're going to go a few more dominoes down. So if 30% of the grains in the world are now being limited, and we're going to get to the fertilizer here in just a moment, how are we going to not only create things like bread and pasta, right? Food in general, but how are we going to provide the feed for animals? Because animals eat grains and corn. So if 30% of the market is being cut off, remember the inflation from last year, right? The US government was only reporting, 7% inflation? When you and I talked about how the actual inflation was 30-40%, I think both you and I remember the Domino's story specifically, where I think it was 10 wings for $8.99, but then they're selling the 8 wings for $8.99, which represents, doing the numbers on the top of my head, is 24% increase. So I know you are seeing the increase in the supermarket, that isn't 7%. So now we have a situation where you can see that not only the price of food, but also the price of feeding things like animals that we buy, which is meat and chicken and all these other things, are going to start going through the roof as well. The price of wheat, if you guys didn't know, most commodities are on an exchange. It's like a transparent pricing mechanism, right? So the CME, which is the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, is the biggest exchange operator in the world. Most of the commodities in the world are there on the CME. Well, wheat, because of this situation with the war in Ukraine, had a limit up, which basically means that the price went up so fast that they had to halt trading in the CME and the exchange, where people decide on the price of wheat. So what's coming is going to be extremely bad. So make sure you're prepared. Every week when you go to the store, buy some canned tuna, some canned roast beef. It lasts for 5 years. If the conspiracy theories are wrong, nothing's going to happen. Everything's going to be fine, right? But if the conspiracy theorists are right, that crazy Marcello that told you to start buying food 2 years ago might not have a problem finding food. So Macro, which is another company here in Spain, also Colombia, all through Latin America, starting to limit their, I couldn't verify where this picture came from, but I think it's in Spain. And guys, just get ready. I'm going to give you various examples of this. Even the soybean crop out of Brazil, they're because of the rains, they're not able to transport the soybean. So it's not even just Ukraine and Russia. There's ships that are waiting off the coast of Brazil to be able to pick up the soybean, and soybean is used in a variety of things. Brazil actually exports 44% of the world soybean. They just can't get up on the ships. So they're waiting over 40 days when the average was about 4, 5, 6 days. Russia and Belarus, and this is the important things, Russia and Belarus together account for 1/3 of the world's potash. Potash is what goes into fertilizer. If you guys remember from a few weeks ago, we also talked about a material called urea, which is processed in natural gas. Well, places like Russia, for example, don't care about the climate. They're continuing to produce as much as they can when it comes to oil and natural gas. So now we have 1/3 of the world's exports of things like potash, which goes into fertilizer, being limited. So what's going to happen to the cost of fertilizer? You see? So we have the inputs to grow the food exploding in price. Then we have the actual food itself exploding in price, which means that a few months from now, if you're able to find the food, it's going to be exorbitantly high as well. This is why I told you guys at the beginning of the year that I think the inflation this year is going to be probably like 40, 50%. So we literally have turned into a third world country. Surprise! But you know what hasn't gone up in price? The like button. So you should leave your like if you like the videos, because we're not raising the price right now. We might increase the price in the future. Just kidding. And if you guys are listening on the podcast as well, they told me to mention this. Look for Marcello Trader or Marcello Arrambide, if you guys can spell my name, or Marcello recap of the week, and you guys should be able to find that handsome looking gentleman on YouTube instead of the podcast. And if you guys want to listen instead of watch, you guys can look for Day Trading Academy, and then that'll come up on the podcast. Other than that, winter wheat crop in China is the worst in history. And then we also have, as I told you, the Australian news sites. And I'm going to show it here so you guys can see it. This isn't a joke. Get ready for food rationing. So we're talking about digital ration cards. Remember how they tried to create that system for the digital, I don't want to say the V word, the thing that goes into your arm. So now you might have to have a digital ID to go in and buy food. Wonder where they come up with that idea. South Korea animal feed producers are declaring force majeure, which basically means they're able to get out of their contracts because of the extenuating circumstances. So the feed is what they feed animals. So they can't get the fertilizer, they can't get the grains to be able to make the food that they give animals. See how it works? We even have other countries banning the export of things like wheat, corn, and sugar. Moldova, for example, is going to stop exporting on March 1st. Hungary also has reported it as well. And the wheat prices are the highest prices since 2008. Now, the United States has imposed similar sanctions to other countries, for example, like Venezuela, North Korea, and Iran, but not as an economy as big as Russia's. Their 11th largest economy in the world, just ahead of Brazil. And basically, we're doing just a tit for tat now, right? So 36% of Russia's total budget in 2021 is from oil and natural gas. A country like Colombia, for example, is over 50%. So in retaliation to the sanctions that aren't really sanctions because they're not doing much, right? Because again, we're still paying Russia to import oil in the United States when we literally can just produce it ourselves. Which, on a side note, Elon Musk, the biggest clean energy guy in the world, had a tweet out that said we have to increase the production of oil and natural gas in the United States because we can't just magically switch to clean power from one day to the next. So this is going to imply a significant amount of pain for both you and I because it's literally going to explode the price of absolutely everything. Other than that, commodity prices have soared since 2009, and Russia can obviously retaliate against the sanctions by literally just cutting off the food supply and the fertilizer supply. See how it works, the dominoes? Oil went up by quite a bit. U.S. oil hit $116, while Brent, which is the international crude, almost hit $119, highest level since May of 2012. Canada becomes the first Western nation to specifically target Russian energy and ban absolutely everything from Russia. Russia provides 10% of the global supply, ranked third overall in production after the United States and Saudi Arabia. Excuse me, I believe it's backwards. Saudi Arabia and U.S., don't quote me on that. However, the renewed importance of energy independence weighs on a lot of the climate change efforts. We have the European Union now increasing coal imports by 56% in 2021. Remember that coal is supposedly the worst fossil fuel for the climate. UK Coal Authority is allowing a mine in Wales to increase output by 40 million tons over the next 20 years. And we even have Australia opening more coal mines as well. Remember, by the way, that between China and also India, they were literally opening a new coal power plant every week. But you and I can't open up a pipeline that's going to help stop import oil from Russia. Crude for the week went up 26% in the U.S. Brent went up over 20%. And precious metals, which is one of my favorites, gold went up by over 4% to $1,973, while silver went up almost 6% to $25.83. The U.S. dollar in finance and banking news is still the dominant currency around the world, but the purchasing power has gone down by 20 to a 25-year low. And you can see the chart there just keeps going down and down and down. Eventually, when everybody realizes that they can't rely on the, quote, full faith of the U.S. government that the U.S. dollar is backed by, that's where we're going to see a lot bigger problems because the dollar is going to collapse even more. Saturday, the strongest economic sanctions yet on Russia. They removed the central bank and main banks from SWIFT, further isolating Russia from the financial system. And then the U.S. Treasury Department banned the central bank, as I mentioned, and the Foreign Investment Fund from SWIFT. So basically, Russia's cut off from the financial system, but let's just keep paying them for oil. You see how this is so ironic? We literally are sanctioning the economy, but we're still sending them money for their oil because we import, I think it was over 600,000 barrels of oil a day from Russia. I mean, just the irony is just... Now, it has affected Russia overall. The ruble, which is their currency, has gone down by over 30% overnight. And in the meantime, the central bank there in Russia has increased their interest rates to 20%. And there's some rumors out there that the Russians are going to tie the ruble to gold to make it a gold-backed currency. And if that happens, that might change the game a little bit. The biggest bank in Russia, which is called Sberbank, is on the brink of collapse as savers went in to go ahead and take out all of their money. The shares plunged 95%. If you guys remember, something similar happened in Canada when they had the bank run as well. All of a sudden, everybody forgets about the dictatorship in Canada and the pandemic. The worst virus in the history of the world. All of a sudden, this is not the worst virus. Funny how that happens, huh? Other than that, we'll leave it there so we don't get censored. U.S. mortgage rates are falling. Home prices are likely to continue to surge. The prices in January went up 19.1% higher, which is the biggest year-over-year rate in 45 years. Now, this is great for the economy in the U.S. because remember, the construction and the housing market is about 15 to 17% of the overall market. So if the cost to get a home, right, if you're going to buy a home, what do you have to do? Get a mortgage, right? So if the cost of your monthly payment goes down because the interest rate goes down, then obviously that helps a lot and it makes that market boom. Largest two-day drop in mortgage rates since the start of the pandemic. It went from 4.18% to 3.9%. So that means that the housing market might see a little bit of a tick up, which is a good thing. Political news, Hungary's Viktor Orban, which is a longtime ally of Putin, has made a reversal in policy in swift political retreats. They've taken 85,000 refugees to date. And if I have my numbers right here, go down the list, there's been 1.2 million refugees in Ukraine that have gone to many different countries, with Poland being the biggest receiver. There were even people going to the stadium to give blood. And as kids and families arrive in Poland, they're giving them toys, which is outside of the horrible situation happening right now in Ukraine and Russia. It's something beautiful to see that humanity is still kind of helping each other out. The economic news, the manufacturing PMI in China went up. It went to 50.2, which means that it showed an increase, a growth in the factory activity. This is actually a significant thing because obviously the majority of things that are made in the world are made in China. Other than that, the GDP in Australia, like it's a like it's a bunch of countries together. They went up 3.4% from the third quarter to the fourth last year, and they're expected to have a 3% gain in the economy, which is surprising because of the strict lockdowns that they had because of the pandemic. Remember that you can travel to Europe and Australia now. They officially opened up their borders as long as you have the Jabba Jabba Doo. Labor Department on Friday, U.S. added 678,000 jobs in February. This was due to the dropping of a lot of the restrictions of the pandemic. So even though we have exploding prices everywhere, there's a lot more people that are going out to restaurants and shops and hotels. Remember, I always say this every week, that the most important number in any economy, mostly an industrialized economy, which is the majority of the world outside of the majority of Africa and a few countries in Asia, is the consumer spending. In the United States, it's almost 70% of the economy, and in most other countries, it's more than 50% of the economy. So this is an extremely good thing, even though the economy isn't showing very good numbers, especially now because of the new food crisis and energy crisis that we're going to have. Finnair, which is an airline out of Finland, and the corporate news collapsed by 20% after the sanctions that were placed. Russia said that the Europeans couldn't fly in their airspace, and Europe said that the Russians couldn't fly in their airspace. So now a company like Finland, which goes from, I don't know if I can show you a map here because it's supposed to be backwards, but if Russia is here, Finland is here, a lot of times Finnish airlines would have to cross from here to be able to go to places like Asia. And obviously it's going to affect their route, and it's going to be much more costly for them as well. Tesla went up 7.48% on Monday after the U.S. gas national average went up by quite a bit. Now remember that the increase in the gas prices have already gone up significantly without the war on Russia. The government is going to try to blame that now, but remember that it's gone up quite a bit even before that. So don't let them blame Russia for their failed policies. Other than that, we also have other electric vehicle manufacturers go up quite a bit. Rivian, which is the truck manufacturer, and the SUV primarily went up 7.2%, while NIO went up 10%, and shares of Boeing went down 13%. Also because of the sanctions, a lot of people don't realize that Russian cargo planes are used to fly structures from other plants to the Boeing plant in Washington, Seattle, and now they're not going to be able to do that anymore. So obviously it's going to cost them quite a bit as well. Target went up over 9%, almost 10% after they had really great financials. They beat expectations, and they're saying that they're still giving a positive forecast of 2022. And Vroom, which is the online used sale firm, used car company, they went down by over 46% after the prices of used cars are exploding, and you can't find used cars to buy anymore, right? Because we have a situation where new cars can't be found because of the chips that, by the way, the majority are made in Taiwan. And it's not like China's going to go after Taiwan now, since NATO and the US just allowed Russia to invade Ukraine, right? You see how we put the dominoes together? Leave your like. I still haven't increased the price yet on the like button. So now this company, which sells used cars, can't have used cars to sell, and then the used cars that they do have are exploding in price. And the shares of the airlines, which is United Airlines, American Airlines, in addition to others, their stocks went down by quite a bit because of the explosion of the cost in oil. So obviously jet fuel is their second biggest cost after labor. And obviously this is a very bearish signal for a lot of these companies. And on top of that, people are going to travel less because it costs a lot more, right? And in trade news, world's 3 largest shipping lanes companies are going to stop all deliveries to Russia outside of essentials. So Maersk and the other 2 large companies are just going to stop the shipping altogether to Russia, obviously over its situation with Ukraine. Investment news, property, and also, well, property, we're talking about houses, mansions, yachts. The U.S. is announcing a new task force in addition to France to go after properties that are owned by Russian oligarchs. Cars, yachts are all on the list. And we also have a bunch of huge yachts that are owned by Russian billionaires that are headed towards Montenegro in Italy to be able to try to avoid those sanctions. And another investment news as well, we had Ford Motor Co., which is launching. Remember that the Ford F-150 is the best-selling vehicle in the last 40 years in the United States. So them taking that car electric means that the game is changing, right? So Ford is now going to set up their operations where they have the electric unit and the gas unit, or the internal combustion engine unit, completely separate to be able to go ahead and make it more efficient, which is a good thing because obviously Ford is kind of jumping in and putting their muscle around to be able to go ahead and sell the best-selling vehicle in the United States, and they're starting to sell it electric. International news, they are having peace negotiations on Sunday. By the time you guys watch this, on the border of Belarus and Ukraine. So now Russia and Ukraine are going to try to hash things out. So we'll see if that works. There's also going to be a ceasefire, supposedly to be able to allow a lot of the humanitarian corridors from Ukrainian cities, so people can leave as the war is going to continue. And in addition to that, a lot of people are saying that Russia or Putin didn't expect so much of a defensive or so much of a stronger resistance from Ukraine. That's part of the reason why he's buying some time. EC President, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, for the first time in its history, Europe is going to start buying weapons for another country. And obviously this is talking about Ukraine. And there's a smoke visible in a nuclear power plant in Ukraine, the largest nuclear power plant in the country, in the continent of Europe, which supplies 20% of the electricity in Ukraine. There was a lot of, let's call it rumors, while the Russians supposedly were firing. It escalated and it turned out to be a little bit different. And in unusual facts this week, we have the economic turmoil invasion of 1/3 of the wealth of the 20th richest billionaires. They've lost 1/3 of their wealth overall, about $80 billion, as the sanctions and seizures are escalated. Tasmanian tiger, and other interesting news, is one of the Australia's most iconic species. It went extinct in 1936, but there's a group of researchers that are going to set up a lab near the University of Melbourne that are supposedly trying to bring it back. And they say they're going to bring it back within about a decade or so. And Colombia is moving forward to recovering the long-lost Spanish wreck first discovered in 2015. There's a bit of a spat, let's call it, between Spain, Bolivia, and Colombia, because they're all claiming that it's theirs, even though it's in Spanish. It's in Colombia territorial waters. The Colombian government is considering 200 tons of artifacts a national treasure, and they want to build a museum in Cartagena to be able to house it. That's the news of this week, guys. I hope you're getting ready for what's coming, right? I think the preppers were right. Go out and buy some extra food. Prepare yourself, because what's coming is going to be even worse. I don't want to see you suffer. I love you a lot. I've been talking about this for years, and it's starting finally to culminate. So leave your like first. Prepare yourself by leaving a like button. And then after that, go out and buy some food. We'll see you next week.